All right, so today we're going to really dig into this whole electric vehicle.
Okay.
You handed me this stack of research from the International Energy Agency, and some of it's pretty wild. Like, are we really seeing EVs like take over this decade?
Well, the IEA seems to think so. I mean, their projections for EV sales are pretty remarkable.
Yeah, let's start there. Over 20% of new cars sold in 2024 were electric. Is that like a blip or is that like a real shift?
I think it's a significant trend. If
Well,
you look back just a few years,
mm-hmm.
the share of EVs was just a tiny fraction of that. This kind of growth isn't a fad. It's signaling a shift, I think a fundamental shift, in consumer behavior, but also in the entire automotive landscape.
Okay, but like, is that going to be enough to really put a dent in those global emissions targets?
Well, the IEA actually says that EVs are the key technology for decarbonizing transportation.
Which is a big deal because transportation is a big chunk of those emissions.
Right, exactly.
Okay, but even if everyone wanted to switch to electric tomorrow, there are still some pretty big roadblocks, right? Like, what about people in developing nations who can't afford the upfront cost or don't have access to charging?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. The report acknowledges those challenges, and it highlights the disparities in global adoption rates.
Mm.
So access to these clean energy solutions isn't equal. It's something we need to address if we want to see global adoption of EVs.
For sure. Okay, so EVs are good for the planet, but will they stay a luxury item or will they eventually become affordable for like the average driver?
That's where things get really interesting. The IEA found that the price gap between EVs and gas-powered cars is closing rapidly.
Wait, seriously? Like,
Yeah.
how rapidly are we talking?
In China, for example,
Mm.
over 60% of EVs sold in 2023 were cheaper than gas-powered cars.
Cheaper? How is that even possible?
It's mostly due to increased competition, particularly from Chinese manufacturers who are driving prices down.
Okay, so does that mean that EVs could actually be a budget-friendly option for everyone soon?
It's definitely possible. The IEA suggests that we could see price parity in major markets by 2030.
Wow, if that happened, that would be a total game changer.
Absolutely. You would make EVs accessible to a much wider range of consumers, and it would probably accelerate the transition even further.
Okay, so we've got this price war brewing, but zooming out to the global EV landscape, it seems like it's not a level playing field.
Yeah, the report paints this picture of what they call a tale of three markets, with China, Europe, and the US each on their own trajectory.
So who's leading the charge?
China is the undisputed leader right now.
Mm.
The numbers don't lie. They accounted for 60% of global EV sales in 2023.
60%? That's huge. What are they doing over there that's driving that kind of growth?
I think a lot of it comes down to government policies
Mm-hmm.
and aggressive investment in EV infrastructure. They've really been pushing for widespread adoption.
Okay, so what about Europe?
Europe is making progress. Their sales increased by almost 20% in 2023, but they're still playing catch up to China. They've implemented their own policies, but the results haven't been as dramatic.
And bringing up the rear, we have the U.S.
The U.S. is also seeing significant growth, over 40% in 2023. But their overall market share is still behind Europe and China, at around 10%.
Okay, so China's in the lead, Europe's second, and the U.S. is trying to keep up. Why do you think we're seeing such different adoption rates across those major markets?
Well, there are a lot of factors at play. But one key difference is government policies and incentives.
Right, like those zero-emission vehicle mandates and CO2 emission standards, not to mention those purchase incentives.
Exactly. The strength and types of these policies vary between regions. China has been incredibly proactive, which has contributed to their market dominance. Europe has its own set of policies, and the U.S. is catching up, but maybe not at the same pace.
So governments are putting their foot on the accelerator?
I like that analogy. But policies alone aren't enough. We need to address the infrastructure challenges too, particularly the lack of public charging stations.
Yeah, range anxiety is a real thing. People are worried about getting stranded with a dead battery.
It's understandable, especially for people who rely on their car for long distances, or who can't charge at home. Home charging is common for many EV owners, but we need a major expansion of public charging infrastructure to support widespread adoption.
And is that happening?
It's improving, but there's still a long way to go. The IEA stresses the importance of investment in public charging stations. If we want to make EVs a viable option for everyone, we need to make charging as easy as filling up a gas tank.
Speaking of the IEA, They have that global EV data explorer with those interactive maps showing charging point locations.
Right.
Maybe you could check it out.
It's a great resource.
Okay, so we've got governments pushing policies, but infrastructure is lagging behind. What about the automakers themselves? Are they on board with this electric revolution?
Oh, they're definitely on board. The IEA report says that over 20 major automakers, representing 90% of car sales in 2023, have set their own EV targets.
Wow, 90%. So they're not just reacting to government mandates, they're setting their own ambitious goals. That's a huge sign of confidence in EVs.
It is. They see the writing on the wall. They're getting big on electric.
Now that's a big deal. Are there any specific automaker targets that stand out to you?
Well, Volkswagen has incredibly ambitious goals. They're aiming to have over 50% of their sales be electric by 2030 in the US and even higher in Europe.
Wow, that's impressive. So it sounds like the industry is all in on this electric future. But let's dive into the technology itself. What's happening with batteries and charging?
Ah, yes, the beating heart of the electric vehicle. Battery technology is evolving at an incredible pace, and that's a key driver of all this progress we're seeing.
So we're talking batteries, like the heart and soul of any EV. What kind of advancements are we seeing in battery tech these days?
Well, one of the big ones is the increasing energy density of batteries. We're getting more range out of smaller and lighter batteries, which is a big deal for tackling range anxiety.
Right, so more miles on a single charge, that's a win for drivers. But what about charging times? Are we still talking hours to juice these things up?
No charging technology is also advancing rapidly. Fast charging stations are becoming more widespread. So that's cutting down the time it takes to charge significantly.
That's good news. But with all this talk about batteries, I can't help but think about the environmental impact. Isn't battery production pretty resource intensive?
Yeah, it can be. The IEA report acknowledges the EV battery production can be very energy intensive and requires a lot of raw materials.
So it's not a perfectly green solution.
Well, every technology has an environmental footprint. The important thing is that the industry is working to address these challenges. There's a lot of research and development going on, focused on sustainable battery production, including exploring alternative battery chemistries that use fewer rare earth minerals.
So less reliance on those hard-to-get materials. That's good news for the planet. Are there any other initiatives going on to try to minimize the environmental impact of batteries?
Absolutely. Battery recycling is becoming more and more important. It allows us to recover valuable materials and reduce waste, and it makes the whole process more sustainable.
So the industry's thinking about the entire life cycle of the battery. That's good. But how is this massive adoption of EVs going to impact the energy grid? Can the grid even handle all these extra electrons flowing around?
That's a great question. The IEA report emphasizes the need for smart grid integration as EV adoption grows, because as more people plug in their EVs, it's going to put a strain on the power grid. Smart grid technologies can help us manage that demand and ensure we have a reliable supply of energy.
So it's about making the grid more efficient and adaptable. What exactly does smart grid integration entail?
Imagine a system that can anticipate and respond to changes in demand. Smart grids use sensors and communication technologies to optimize energy distribution and prevent blackouts.
So fewer blackouts, even with millions of EVs plugged in. That's good, but can't we use EVs as part of the energy solution?
Exactly. Smart grids can leverage EVs as a resource. We can use their batteries to store energy and even feed power back into the grid when it's needed.
Whoa, so EVs become part of the solution, not just consumers of energy? What's that called?
Vehicle to grid, or V2G. Imagine your car powering your house during a blackout. That's the potential of this technology.
V2G. Okay, I'm adding that to my list of things to research. But getting back to the present, what are governments doing to support the transition to EVs? We talked about policies earlier, but are there any other initiatives we should be aware of?
Well, governments are using a variety of tools to incentivize consumers, support industry development, and really create a favorable market for EVs. Financial incentives like tax credits or rebates are common to help make EVs more affordable.
Yeah, those upfront costs can be a barrier. Any other ways governments are encouraging EV adoption?
A lot of governments are setting targets for EV adoption, mandating that a certain percentage of new car sales must be electric by a certain date. They're also investing in public charging stations.
So a mix of incentives, regulations, and infrastructure investments. Sounds like they're taking this pretty seriously.
They are. The IEA report stresses that continued policy support will be crucial if we want to achieve those global climate goals.
Right, but it's not just governments. We've talked about how automakers are setting their own ambitious targets too. What's driving the shift from their perspective?
They're responding to a number of things. Consumer demand is growing. More and more people are interested in EVs. Plus, there's the need to reduce emissions and comply with environmental regulations.
So they're feeling the pressure from consumers and regulators, but it's good to see them embracing this change. How is this EV revolution changing the way we drive and think about transportation?
Well, for one, EVs are changing the driving experience itself. They're known for their smooth, quiet acceleration and that instant torque. They're fun to drive.
Yeah, they can really take off from a standstill.
They can. But beyond performance, EVs are contributing to a shift toward more sustainable transportation. We're reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, promoting cleaner air, and even changing the way we fuel our vehicles.
Oh, so we still need to fuel EVs.
Of course. But instead of stopping at gas stations, EV owners are plugging in at home, at work, or at public charging stations. It's a more integrated approach. And as charging infrastructure continues to expand, it's becoming easier and more convenient than ever before.
It sounds like we're moving towards a future where charging an EV is just as normal as filling up a gas tank. But with all this talk about the EV revolution, I have to ask, is this just hype? Or is this shift to electric vehicles really inevitable?
That's the million-dollar question. We can't predict the future for sure. But all the evidence suggests that this shift is more than just a passing trend. We're seeing supported government policies, growing consumer demand, rapid advancements in battery technology, and significant investments from automakers.
So it's not just one thing, it's like a bunch of trends all pointing in the same direction.
Exactly. And as these trends continue, it's becoming clear that electric vehicles are going to play a major role in the future of transportation. But we still have a lot more to uncover.
All right, we're back, and I think we're ready to kind of wrap up this whole EV deep dive.
Yeah, sounds good.
We've covered so much. Sales figures, battery tech, the role of government's automakers.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. We've really explored this transformative technology.
So where do we go from here? What's the next chapter in this EV revolution?
Well, I think one thing's for sure, the pace of change is only going to get faster.
Right.
We're moving away from EVs as like a niche product, and they're becoming the mainstream.
And a lot faster than I think people expected. But it's not all smooth sailing, right? We still need that charging infrastructure. And what about the environmental impact of the batteries?
Absolutely. Those
Yeah.
are big challenges, and we need to address them if we want a sustainable and fair transition.
Okay, so what should we be looking out for in the next few years?
Keep an eye on battery technology. Advancements in like battery chemistry, energy density charging times, those will be crucial.
So those are the things that are going to make EVs more appealing to more people. But what about the grid? Can it really handle all these EVs plugging in?
That's where smart grids come in. As more EVs hit the road, we need to manage that demand on the grid. We need to make sure there's enough electricity to go around.
Right. And governments will play a big role too. What can we expect from them?
I think we'll see continued support for EVs
Mm.
through incentives, regulations, investments in charging. But as the market grows, I think there will be less of a need for subsidies. We need policies that encourage fair competition.
Okay, so governments are setting the stage. What about the automakers?
They're going through a massive change. They're putting so much money into developing and building EVs. We can expect to see a ton of new EV models coming out soon.
So more choices for consumers. But why should the average person care about all this?
Well, EVs are a cleaner way to get around. They can help us fight climate change and improve air quality.
So it's not just about being trendy. It's about making good choices. But are EVs just good for the environment?
No, they're practical and affordable. Longer ranges, faster charging, and better prices. Plus, they're fun to drive.
It does seem like the future of driving is electric. Will gas-powered cars go extinct?
Who knows? But everything seems to be pointing to a future dominated by EVs. The momentum is definitely there.
That's something to think about. As technology keeps getting better and prices keep dropping, we might see gas-powered cars become a thing of the past.
It's a fascinating idea.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of EVs. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into another cutting-edge topic.
Until then, stay curious.